You all set, Pierre?
We're live.
Okay, thank you. Let's call this meeting to order. The Senate Judiciary Committee to continue our work on property tax. The first bill for our consideration this evening is Senate File 126, Property Tax Exemption Inflation Cap 2, sponsored by Senator Dockstader. Senator, would you like to come forward, please? Let's get this underway. We're anxious to hear about your bill. Walk us through Senate File 126, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee of bringing Senate File 126, Property Tax Exemption Inflation Cap 2. I sat down with actually my county assessor, and I said, if you had a proposal that would kind of be your, what would you like to see in a bill? What are your rathers? Like to see this or that? And we kind of put together a list, and so this resulted in this bill, which establishes a property tax exemption for a single-family residential property and requiring information to be included in the tax assessment. I'll just hit the highlights real quick in the first 2 or 3 pages and then talk to you about what the bill actually means. Page 2, there's a 3% cap along about line 11, and then it needs to be, it's based on the cap would be based on the 2020 year, 3%, that's on page 2, and then page 3, along about 3 or 4 lines, it would only apply to one home. You couldn't do it to a second home. And then continue with page 3, line 10, property shall be valued at full value for 1 year for one property tax year, full value for 1 year, and then the definition down on page 20 for family residential property. What does that mean, the family residence definitions in there? And then over on page 4, how the exemption is determined. What this does, let me just go straight to what it actually does, if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely.
It does the following, 4 things. The bill would provide a property tax exemption for any amount of property tax value for a residential structure that is in excess of a 3% increase in the value from the prior year. In excess of 3%. Number 2, for the first year of the exemption, that value would be determined by going back to the 2020 value with a maximum increase of 3% per year for each year from 2021 to 2024. Number 3, if a person owns more than one residential property, they would only be eligible for the exemption on one property. The property is acquired by a new owner. For that year, the exemption would not apply, and the property would be valued at full value for that year, and then the exemption would apply for that new owner in the subsequent years. And finally, number 4, the bill would also require information related to the exemption to be included on the assessment schedule that is provided to taxpayers. Those are the 4 main points. It does probably not as a deep dive as some of the others out there on the caps, but when I sat down with my assessor, she said, that's a pretty good general mix, and that's something that she would be comfortable with, but she would say that she wouldn't be speaking for all the assessors, but we kind of worked together on that. I said, what if we were to walk away with something, to my assessor, if we were to walk away with something, what would work for you? Because they live the front lines of this world, this ever-changing property tax world.
So, Senator, thank you very much for running us through the bill. Having sat here earlier today, are you confident that this bill, it feels like it's pretty similar to what we talked about earlier? It feels like our counties would be okay and our department would be okay to get this up and running in a hurry, right?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would let the department speak, but I did do a little flyover with the department way early on. But who knows, there's been a lot of bills brought forward. They may feel different. So
yeah.
I was trying to work with my person in my county that sees the front line. And there's a couple of counties out west that I call ground zero for all of this.
It sounds similar. You're suggesting a 3% cap. I think the other bill had a 5% cap.
Yeah.
Am I reading that correctly?
That's, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. Yep.
Okay.
And I was tracking that one as well. So maybe not as deep as dive, but still something to be put on the table for consideration. And I would hope that put all our heads together before we close this session out and go home with a good piece of property tax legislation, property tax relief legislation.
You had us at hello right there, Senator.
Okay.
So any questions of the sponsor committee? Anybody have any questions before? If you could hang tough, we'd sure appreciate that. Senator, we're going to go to comments on the bill, any testimony. So let's look to the department for any thoughts on Senate File 126.
Mr. Chairman, again, it's a pleasure to be before this committee. The Director of Revenue doesn't have that opportunity very often. Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to Senate File 126. Absolutely right in that we've had numerous conversations and brainstorming and trying to approach this property tax relief subject. If I may, I thought I would just somewhat walk through the bill and offer some comments.
Thank you, Director. That sounds great.
So, Mr. Chairman, it is our understanding when we read the bill that on page 2, line 4, it's everything. When you look at a portion of taxable value of single-family residential properties, if you go to the definition that is on page 3, single-family residential property means the structure intended for human habitation. Then it goes through those, and then it says other structures associated with the residential structure, including garages, sheds, and other outbuildings. It also states the associated improved land. So basically, we're taking this as being everything on that residential property. As we move down to capital A, we've got several moving parts here. So as opposed to the mechanics of what was House Bill 45, where we just looked at prior year and we applied a 105%, and then anything in excess of 105% was exempt, this bill requires a couple calculations. So it states that in January 1, 2025, and this bill does go into effect in 2025, we make two calculations. The county assessor would be required to determine the prior year fair market value, or take that prior year fair market value, and then that would be compared to the 2020 fair market value plus 3% for each of the years. So 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24, and then we'll hit 25 when this law goes into effect. Some of the items that we have as far as challenges, and we would look to guidance within this legislation, are the fact that properties don't exist. That would work fine if all of the properties in Wyoming existed in 2025 exactly like they did in 2020. So we have provided a handout for you, and you'll notice that it has a header that says structures built 2019 through 2023. The reason that's important is the first time structures hit the tax roll, if it was built in 2019, they first get assessed in 2020. So the numbers you have before you, residential structures since 2019, 10,593. Residential outbuildings, over 18,000 have been added to the assessment roll. This particular handout provides you with commercial structures, although this particular bill does not include commercial structures. In addition to just these additional structures, when you look at the accounts that are in the CAMA system, the computer-assisted mass appraisal system, in 2019, we had 308,000 plus. In 2023, that number is 314,318. Perhaps when you drove to Cheyenne, you may have seen new subdivisions that have popped up, new houses, new structures. Those were not on the assessment roll in 2020. So House Bill 45 has a provision that if you add new construction or if you added an addition to an existing structure, that then for that first year you are at full value. This particular bill does not have any language that relates to changes in property characteristics, so that's something that we would ask be at least considered. because this is going to be a challenge to go backward. Did you have a house that was built in 2020 and then they added an outbuilding in 2022? Do we apply the 3% to just the house? Just a lot of mathematic challenges to go back. Always keeping in mind that who do we need to be able to answer to? That taxpayer that gets an assessment schedule that stands at the counter and says, I want to know how you arrived at my value. And then I want to know how you arrived at my neighbor's value. So those are the challenges that county assessors have. And we want to make sure that any legislation that passes addresses those items so that all 23 county assessors are applying the statute uniformly. As I move to page 3, this bill does ask that the applicant apply to the Department of Revenue. And that's, I believe, because good Senator, the sponsor of the bill, and I talked about, if there were to be some sort of an application requirement, how would that be best administered? And we talked about the Department of Revenue probably being able for some of these bills to prop up one place where all property owners could go to. But in this particular situation, on this particular bill, you'll find that all of the exemption is administered by the county assessor. There's no qualifications for this bill other than they can only use it on one property, but there's no residency requirement. There's no, that they have to live there for X number of months. There's none of that. It's just basically saying, if you own multiple properties in Wyoming, which one do you want to use it on? So I do feel that perhaps in this piece of legislation, that would be better suited at the county assessor's office because they have all the information. The other piece of that is there's no deadline here for applying for the exemption. Although when we turn to the last page, and we'll speak to this in a moment, there is a requirement that the assessment schedule reflect the amount of the exemption, an estimated amount of tax relief that's granted by this. So in order to do all of that, the assessors really need to know early on which properties qualify for this exemption. So I would suggest an amendment that would perhaps use a February 1st application deadline. That way assessors have some time to process this so that they can actually put it on the notice of assessment, which has to be mailed out to the taxpayers no later than the 4th Monday in April. So it just gives a little time there, and the assessors can speak to what would be best for their offices. The other piece related, I think, really is just the last page, page 4, and that's that requirement of having the value on the assessment schedule itself. And I believe that that covers all of the items that I saw related to the Department of Revenue's responsibilities. I will tell you that the computer-assisted mass appraisal system, as it currently exists, I can go into that system and I can put any date in there and I can tell you what the value was on that property. But what I don't have capability and functionality in the CAMA system is this calculation, the 3%, and we have not received a quote from our CAMA vendor because I really am not sure how it would be intended to be worked. What is the legislative intent of how we apply that 3% when there's changes in the property characteristics, when that property didn't exist in 2020? Did you just happen to be the homeowner that built in 2018? So your value is captured, but the homeowner that built in 2020, their home isn't on the tax roll yet. So do they see some sort of a benefit? So once we have those items clarified, then I can go to the CAMA vendor and say, okay, this is what we need to get programmed. And we need to get it done so we can implement this for January 1 of 2025. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying that before we pay the vendor to change programming, I need to have a clarification of how that should function. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would answer any questions.
Okay, questions of the director. Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I understood what you said, but ownership is not a key issue. So it could be owned by a real estate investment trust, a REIT, as long as only one single-family property. Am I understanding that right?
Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
back to you, Director.
Senator Furphy, that's how I interpret the language to read. This bill, unless I've missed it, does not require an owner-occupied property. It just states that if you own multiple properties, you can only claim it on one.
Mr. Chairman?
Okay, go ahead, Senator.
Thank you again. Just curious, making sure one of these investment companies couldn't go between counties and own properties in a different county. You would be able to track that at the Department of Revenue if they tried to do that?
Mr.
Director?
Chairman, Senator Furphy, we could run reports at the end of the, right before assessments go out and track and see if we've got one particular ownership that's in multiple counties that's single-family residential. We could certainly share that information with the county assessors or post it on we've got an assessor portal, we call it, where we share information with county assessors. We could post it there. I think that is doable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Any further questions? Senator Cooper.
Brief question on that calculation of the, back to 2020. When we bring that forward, first year, it's obviously 1.03 calculation. Is that accrued every year, or do we, in other words, will we end up at 15% after 5 years, or 15.9%? Because the second year it's 3% of 1.03, and the third year it's 3% of 1.06.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper, I believe it is what I would refer to as compounded. So the first, you take the 2020 value, apply the 1.03, anything above that would be exempt. And then we'd go back to that value, apply another 3%. And it would be each year. And it's only in 2025 that we would do that. Once we hit 2025, then we would just use that particular year, or 2025's value for 2026 when we make that comparison, is my understanding.
Right.
So, Director, just real quickly, I'm struggling to find the reference you made to moving this bill under the county assessor's office. Where is the reference?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the ability to clarify. It would be on page 3, the top of the page. It starts on page 2. To receive the exemption under this paragraph, the owner of the single-family residential property shall apply to the Department of Revenue on forms and in the manner prescribed by the department. I believe that would be more appropriately the county assessor. They have the information. And I would suggest adding a deadline date for applying.
So if that language, Director, just read, property shall apply to the county assessor on forms in a manner determined by the assessor?
No later than X.
And I've got February 1st down on line 6, after department shall inform the department by February 1st.
And actually, Mr. Chairman, there would be no notification to the department. It's just a matter of the property owner applying to the county assessor. The county assessor determines whether they qualify or not. And then they make sure that it's posted on the assessment schedule when it's mailed no
We
later
strike
than the
department, it
Monday
would
in
put
April.
county assessor in there, and maybe that,
In the manner determined by the department, typically what that's referring to is for most property tax exemptions, we have rulemaking authority, and we would promulgate the form that would be used by the county assessors. It doesn't have to be specific in this statute. We have promulgation authority throughout all of Title 39. But what that does is it ensures that there's a consistent one form that all 23 counties use instead of everyone getting a different one. So perhaps the language on the forms determined by the department by rule.
Chairman.
So, okay, go ahead, Senator Cooper. I got lost on that last little bit, but go ahead.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Director, this is not going to be an automatic exemption like the other bill we talked about. This will have to be applied for every year. Is that correct?
Go ahead,
Mr.
Director.
Chairman, Senator Cooper, as written, correct.
Okay, go ahead, Senator Sheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This one actually has a fiscal note, and I was just kind of looking at that. Do you think it's fairly accurate that 217 million in tax year 2025, 218 million in tax year 2026? Does that seem accurate to you?
Mr.
Director, any
Chairman,
thoughts?
Senator Schuler, so the manner in which the fiscal notes are completed is we provide the actual historical data to Legislative Service Office. And then they use that data to come up with some numbers. Now, keeping in mind that we utilize Craig report. So that for between 2023 tax year and 2024 tax year, which is fiscal year 2025 collections, the Craig report is indicating that we can expect a 5% increase. And that's for all other property excluding minerals. So that includes commercial, industrial, residential, ag. It's all included in that in the Craig report. So those are the numbers that you're using. So when you compare putting a cap on properties at 3%, even at the 5%, the only thing we've got are the Craig estimates to go by. And they're only saying that we're going to go up by 5% to begin with. So that's why you see fairly small fiscal notes.
Okay, anything else for the director? Director Henson, thank you. Really appreciate that. Very helpful. Any further testimony? Anyone would like to come forward on Senate File 126? Very good. How are things up in Converse County?
Mr. Chairman, they're pretty good, I think. I haven't been there much in the last couple
Yeah.
of weeks, but when I was there, they were cold and windy, so.
Last time I
they
was
were-
there, it's busy, it's busy, but
Mr. Chairman, it is busy.
that's a good thing.
It is, depending on how much staff you have to do that busyness. But thank you for allowing the assessors to talk today. My name is Dixie Huxtable. I am the Converse County Assessor, and I serve as a legislative chair for the Wyoming County Assessors Association. I think the director did a good job of covering the bill with some of the concerns that we had. She's already mentioned them. The calculation within the system, from our perspective, that has to happen within the system. To stay consistent and uniform across the state, we need that CAMA system to be able to do that math. And then we're just going to have to come up with some direction of what we are going to do with those new properties or those new buildings, or how we're going to handle them. They had done the report and provided you with those numbers of new buildings, and that we just have to have some direction from the legislature on what is the intent on how we're going to handle them. I would concur that on page 3, where they're talking about applying to the department, certainly that makes more sense to come to the county assessors on forms that are provided by the department through rules. That's typical language that's in here, and that keeps us uniform across the state. The topic of it being only one single-family residential property in the state, I would just have to think a little bit and some caution. We can certainly get the report from the Department of Revenue if the property is owned exactly in the same name in every jurisdiction. And again, we need some direction with that. That could maybe handled through rules, but some direction from the legislature. If it's husband and wife or wife and husband, if it's an LLC, if they've got a different name, if you've got an investment company that changes their name per county, is that a different entity? I'm not a legal eagle. I don't know that answer, but certainly I can see that happen because I have it in my own county where people have multiple houses and they've put different, they've taken title a little bit differently. And we typically put in the system the way they take title on the deed. So if they have changed the name either significantly or insignificantly, it's going to be different name, and how that will work in the department's report is something that would have to be worked out. And then also on page 3, where you're talking about the taxpayer acquired the property on line 12, I guess I need a little definition on the acquiring, because again, we're not talking about when it's built. So this makes perfect sense when I buy a house. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and I don't have good direction when I own the land and I've sit on the land for 10 years and now I'm building a house and the house got built in 2022. So I didn't acquire it, but I built a brand new house. So how are we going to handle that within the system? It seems pretty simple, as Director Henson said, and I can certainly go back and tell you what the value of your property was in 19. What I can't do is give you the characteristics that go with it, and that makes it a lot more complicated. And we're happy to do the work. We just need the direction of where you want to go with that. And then again, I just clarifying, I guess, on page 4, that the intent of this bill is for all the buildings that's on the account, garages, barns, because we do have residential properties that are not ag that have those kinds of buildings. And so if the intent is that it's all the buildings and that we're taking aggregate value of all of that account, so we're going to look at the total account value for 23 and compare it to 24 or 24 to 25, when we get there, then the limit is on the total. It's not by each individual structure or land or combination thereof. So it's something I think we can work on. I don't know if and when the system that we have is going to be capable of doing that. There's always more versions that come out in any kind of software. Usually those comes with a price tag. So I don't know when that will be or if it will be, but those would be our concerns as far as being able to administer it in a uniform and timely fashion, and having it effective January 25th is in 2025, is certainly gives us some lead time to get there. I just don't know, when you're talking software, sometimes a year isn't a lot of lead time. So with that, I would stand for any questions.
Questions? Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question, the whole issue where we've got almost 30,000 structures that were built, after 2019. And on page 2, where we basically have to determine those exemptions based on the property in 2020, is there any way we can fix that? Would an amendment fix that? Or would we need to change a date to go back? Maybe not that far. I don't know. I'm just kind of looking at what could we do to fix that? Because I think that's an error that needs to be fixed.
On the fly like this, Ms. Huxtable, you have a thought for, I assume we're in paragraph A on page 2.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, excellent questions, and certainly that would be to the sponsor of the bill to determine what the intent is and what they want to do. Some of the bills that we've seen have some exceptions to this exemption if there are significant changes. Significant changes is not always the best language, because what's significant to you and what's significant to me might be different. So certainly we could work on some additional language that if there has been significant structural changes on that account, that maybe the exemption wouldn't apply for 1 year. Kind of the same philosophy as if you acquired it, the first year that you add something new to it that's significant structure-wise. I don't have that exact language or definition, but would certainly be willing to work with the sponsor of the bill and the department to come up with something that might fit.
Thank you for that. Good thoughts, Senator Schuler. I think what I'm inclined to do, committee, will take whatever testimony folks want to provide real quick here on this bill, but we would probably work that to the sponsor. I would say, you know, as this moves, we might want to keep good notes and make sure that we fold some things in there that, you know, I think we can fix a paragraph or two, but all of these might be works in progress to our assessors and everybody else out there. Thank you, Ms. Huxtable. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's get to whoever else would like to comment or testify on Senate File 126, and hope we don't miss anybody. Sorry that we ran out of time earlier today on the earlier bill considered, but we're just trying to punch through. We're late night on about the last night. So go ahead. Hi, Brett.
Hi.
Yeah.
Nice to see you folks again. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this bill. There's several aspects of this bill that I really appreciate. Starting off with residential properties rather than just the resident structure. Because looking at a lot of properties, you know, I would like to have a 2-car, 3-car detached garage qualify for this help. Even though it's not attached to the house, I think it should qualify for it. With some other legislation, it doesn't. I really appreciate the 3% growth. A lower growth rate, of course, is better for the citizens, better for the homeowners. And the having to apply for it, I have absolutely no qualms about that. My Farm Bureau members, so there's a lot of things we have to apply for every year. Putting the burden on the homeowner to have to apply for it. I know it puts more burden on the whoever has to take that application, but if we want to have a fuel tax refund, if we want to get the landowner coupons for hunting, for many government programs, we have to apply for that every year. I have absolutely no qualms about that. With that, trying to be as brief as Farm Bureau lobbyists can be, I will take any questions the committee may have for me.
Thank you, Brett. Really appreciate it always. Anything for the Farm Bureau tonight, committee?
Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. Much appreciated. Good evening, Robert.
Mr. Chairman, Bob McLaurin with WHAM. Very briefly, I think Mr. Reeman expressed a lot of our sentiments today from the county perspective, but the 99 cities in Wyoming are, you know, this doesn't have a backfill provision. It's obviously limited to 3%, but the smaller towns in particular are dependent on property tax. And the last survey we did of our members, 96 of the 99 cities in the town assess full 8 mills. So just keep that in mind, that property tax in these small towns go to provide service. And so just wanted to point that out. I know you know it, but I needed to go on the record for our members. But thank you for your consideration.
Appreciate it, Bob. Thank you so much. Any questions for WHAM tonight? Sorry that we missed you earlier, by the way. Didn't mean to have to go upstairs, but it's that leadership, you know, that keeps cracking the damn whip up there. Okay, so, yeah, he's ignoring us, of course. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else want to come forward here? Okay, let's bring them in real quick. Senate File 126. We're wrapping up consideration of this bill in front of the committee. If you can get them on board. Good evening. Unmute and welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
We sure can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Proceed.
Thank you. My name is Brett Glass, and I am a homeowner and an engineer and a rental property owner and manager in Laramie. And my comments will apply not only to this bill, but also to Senate File 121, which you're going to take up later, and some of the others that you've been discussing.
Okay. Anything you can do to keep it pretty snappy? We're on a late night, the final night for consideration. So
Thank you. Yes, I will do that. I have a list of bullet points, and I'll try to go through them really quickly. First thing I'm concerned about is that the Constitution requires uniform taxation, and several of these bills have exemptions that might violate that provision. You can lose the exemption if you move, even if you move next door. In this bill and some of the others, you can just lose the exemption, and you could wind up paying a lot more of your neighbor than your neighbor, which is not uniform. They applied to single family homes only, but what is a single family home? What if you say rent out your basement, even to a family member? Are they considered to be a separate nuclear family? And who decides that? Does it matter if they're related to you? You could rent it to a student. Do you lose the whole exemption if you do that? What if you have an accessory dwelling unit? Do you lose the exemption then? I have one, and I'm worried that it could disqualify me, even though I'm a longtime resident. Some of the bills require annual applications. Others apply the exemption automatically, which is a better thing to do. Are we going to cause people to fall off, to lose the exemption just because they happen to forget? One of the bills under consideration in the other chamber that is going to come your way soon raises sales taxes and substitutes a regressive tax for one that's at least somewhat related to how wealthy you are, and that's a concern. Under all of these bills, though, there's one thing that they all have in common, and that is, so at least I haven't seen one where it hasn't happened, and that is that renters lose out. And they don't get the exemption, and their landlords don't get the exemption to pass on to them. And this is a real problem because right now employees for businesses are becoming very hard to find. My business is having a terrible time doing that, especially finding entry-level employees. And well, we could have a real problem with a brain drain because students who graduate from UW or elsewhere are going to find that they're at a disadvantage tax-wise. They're not ready to buy yet, and they may leave the state. And some of these bills could give a big exemption to a rich out-of-stater who bought property in Wyoming, but not to a longtime renter, or again, to the landlord to pass it on. Newcomers would lose out under these bills. And that could be a problem if, attracting businesses. If their employees don't want to move here because they're going to be taxed more, that's going to be a problem. We also have a problem that some of these bills create welcome stranger taxation. At least that's what they call it in California, where they have Proposition 13. The inflation cap, I understand why it may seem like a good idea, but if it's applied the wrong way, it's basically the same thing as Proposition 13. Again, you could move across the street and lose the cap and have a big increase. So in any case, I'm just going to, these are just some things I would like you to consider. I hope that this committee will winnow out the bills before passing them all to the floor and resolve some of these issues before recommending any one. But it still might be best to see everything go to the interim and have a bill come from the committee next year. I think that might be the ideal thing if we can wait a year before we move ahead on this. And well, that's all I have to say. I won't take any more of your time. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to comment using Zoom.
Okay, thank you very much. Lots of great points made, and I know lots of those points are being bounced around the Capitol as we speak. So appreciate you weighing in. Have a good night, Mr. Glass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we're going to close testimony on this bill. Committee, what is your pleasure? Okay, Senator Furphy has moved Senate File 126. I think that we have at least one opportunity to fix it a little bit on the top paragraph on page 3. I might go ahead and suggest one, committee, if that's all right. Line 1, property shall apply to the county assessor instead of Department of Revenue, the county assessor, on forms and in a manner determined by the Department of Revenue through rule, to finish that sentence. Okay, Pierre, did you get that? Property shall apply to the county assessor on forms and in a manner determined by the Department of Revenue through rule. Down below, we strike department on line 6 and enter county assessor. by February 1st. How does that sound, committee? I think maybe that caught a
Was that
couple of the
David?
concerns.
February 1st?
Line 6, county assessor by February 1st. Okay. Did you get that one here? Okay, so committee, any discussion on that proposed amendment? All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, that amendment passes. Committee, unless we got a quick fix, I think a couple of those might take a little bit more of a lift. I saw a thumbs up from the senator that he would be working this as we go a little bit. I think the big concern was just property from 2020 to 25 and that change element, Senator Dockstader. And again, we can work this as we go. Okay. Senator Schuler.
Yeah. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm just wondering how all of you feel about, let's see, page 3, line 12. Would it be better to scratch acquired and have owned the property? I know that was brought up by, I think, the assessor. I'm not sure if it helps it or hinders it.
So I'm looking at the sponsor. We are on line 12. Senator, if you want to come forward, please do. This is page 3, line 12, that the taxpayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, I'm fine with that. I would suggest some changes now, and if it was to move out, then I could work on some more.
Sure.
But I think our ultimate goal is to walk away from this session with a strong piece of legislation.
Right.
This can be in the sidelines along the way. And I think you're going to hear some more pieces of legislation that just do what we need to do before this year is over.
I think so. So the proposed amendment is changing the word acquired on line 12 to owned the property. Does that work? Does that work? Senator Furphy? All in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no? Okay. That amendment has passed. Back on the bill. Committee, I think, to be real honest, I agree with the senator. I think what is likely to happen, and I don't believe I'm speaking out of school, I think we're going to work very, very hard to end up with a good piece of legislation that both sides can agree on, and that it could be a hybrid. We'll have to see, but we've got lots of good people working on lots of bills, and sometimes those meld together. Senator, anything else before we go to a vote on Senate File
Mr.
126?
Chairman, committee, this is something we move out, just hold it in the sidelines. And if there is something that fits into that big omnibus property tax relief bill, then all the better. I think there's a better solution out there. And I've already seen some of them that hold a lot of promise.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for bringing Senate File 126. Pierre, would you take roll on Senate File 126, please?
Senator Case,
Excused?
Senator Cooper,
Aye.
Senator Furphy,
Aye.
Senator Schuler,
Aye.
Chairman Linden.
Aye.
All
Senate,
ayes.
thank you, Pierre. Senate File 126 will go to the Senate. The next bill for our consideration, I'm going to set this back for a moment. Senator McEwen is next door. We can go get him, but I think given the fact that Senator Kinski is here, I want to jump right into Senate File 121. Senator Kinski. Property tax homeowners exemption. And tell us about Senate File 121, Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good evening. One very interesting thing off the top about Senate File 121 is it's identical to a bill that last year passed the House at 45 to 16. came over to the Senate 3 days before the end of session, and unfortunately met an untimely demise in committee, but it's shown substantial support in the past. Not that I can say that on the floor, but I think I can say it in here and get away with it.
Oh, heck yeah, I think we can, yeah,
So
let the hair
residential,
down in here a little bit.
residential property tax collections in Wyoming will hit 716 million in 2026. This bill returns 183 million of that to residential property owners. So it reduces the state's take by about 25%. It's a very simple bill. It takes the existing Wyoming homeowners tax credit law, which has a credit of $105. And it changes that credit to $300,000. Pretty simple conceptually. So here's how it works. If your home is assessed at a fair market value of $300,000, a credit or exemption of $300,000 is applied to that value. Your home is assessed at zero. You owe no tax. If your home is assessed at a fair market value, which is what the Constitution requires, of $500,000, under current law, you'd owe $3,300 in tax. But under this bill, a credit of $300,000 is applied to that $500,000 value. Now your home is assessed as if it were a $200,000 home. And you save $2,000 in tax. Instead of owing $3,300, you owe $1,300. So that's fairly substantial savings. To give you an idea of how substantial it is, the Legislative Service Office fiscal staff estimates that approximately 45% of residential homeowners would be completely exempt from property tax under this approach.
Senator, just to interrupt on that point, and it also, what you just stated seems to hit the lower market folks, the less privileged folks who would have a home 300,000 or below. Do I read that correctly?
Absolutely correct, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
So another option is, as the property values rise, the amount of the credit too could be raised. I did not put an automatic inflation adjustment in here, but that would be a relatively simple add if it were of interest. The other thing is, if $300,000 is a little too rich for your blood, it can easily be lowered. And the table, I've got a table. I don't know if I've presented it here with the materials. It looks like I did not. But at $200,000, instead of an annual fiscal impact of 183 million, it'd be a fiscal impact of 150 million, and still 30% of the homes are property tax free. At an exemption amount of $100,000, the annual fiscal impact is 84,000, and 14% of the homes are tax free. The criteria is this: it has to be an owner-occupied home, and you have to have been a Wyoming resident for at least 5 years. But there's no means testing. You can be a prince or a pauper, you're still eligible. You just fill out a form with the assessor that certifies, you self-certify that you have been a resident for more than 5 years. It's your primary resident, and only one home is available for that. The other nice thing about it is you don't require any software change because it's already in the system. We're just changing the amount of the tax credit. So the existing CAMA, computer-assisted mass appraisal system utilized by the assessors, is fully equipped to handle the calculation. Now, the other concern that we hear, and we saw this last year when we lost a couple bills because of the impact on local entities that collect the tax, the existing law includes a backfill. So if your weed and pest district, your city council, your county commissioners, they lose revenue, it's made up to them from the state. In fact, that's the primary fiscal impact of this bill. I'd like to just do a little compare and contrast of this with some of the other approaches, for instance, caps. A cap limits increases going forward, but doesn't give any taxpayers relief for the increases they've already suffered over the last several years. I mean, this gives you some substantial relief. It's also fairly immediate. It doesn't suffer from the problem that a cap does, that if you you own this home for 10 years and then move across the street, all of a sudden you're reset and your property taxes go up. I lived under Prop 13, by the way. It's not pleasant when you change properties. So it adheres to the constitutional requirement that we have to assess based on fair market value. There's some other approaches that give a tax break based on a percentage of home's value. I think this one is superior, and let me tell you why. Let's say there's a Jackson Hole billionaire, we'll say billionaire, has a $10 million home, and there's a 25% exemption or credit that passes the legislature. He now gets an exemption of $2.5 million. A Sheridan homeowner with a house worth $400,000 gets an exemption of $100,000. So there's just far less relief for the humble homeowner. On the other hand, in this scenario, this homeowner would get $300,000 of relief, or 3/4 of her value would be exempt, and the Jackson Hole billionaire would get $10 million less $300,000. Essentially, his tax liability would be unchanged. It'd be rounding error. I think that's important to consider. And I'm not a gouge the rich kind of guy, but we do have to look at the facts. 37% of the residential property tax comes out of Teton County. So those high net worth homes, they're a big, big part of the residential property tax base. It's the old remember the old 80-20 rule? 20% of the property gives 80% of the value. I think we're on our way to that. And for the same reason, I don't like a cap. I mean, why would you cap the rise in those property values when it's such a substantial contributor to the residential property tax base of the state of Wyoming? So with that, it's kind of a run through of the bill. There's not a whole lot to present because it's pretty darn easy, free of a lot of complications. And
Yeah,
with
good
that,
talk,
Mr. Chairman,
Senator. Really appreciate it. I do have one question. Is there a way to game the system? When you go to the bottom of page 2, if I suppose on any of these that we've been considering, if somebody really wants to figure out how to get around them, they probably can, but this is for one home to be verified, I assume by the assessor. I'm not looking at the language, but so tell me about if you own 3 homes and you have a home under a different name as Assessor Huxtable told us, how do we work that out? Is that a concern to you?
Mr. Chairman, I don't quite know how to deal with that one. I'd have to turn to Director Henson or Ms. Huxtable. If they've gone so far as to acquire multiple homes under multiple names, they're pretty
Pretty astute.
they're heading to prison eventually, but that's to make up a completely new name and buy a complete different home to claim the exemption. That'd be it. There are people in the world like that. I'd like to think that there are not a whole lot of people in the world like that, but I can answer at the bottom of page 2, the resident for 5 years, because I did talk with Director Henson, and she said that is purely a self-certification. I mean, they have to sign under oath of perjury that they have been a resident for 5 years, that neither the department nor the assessors have a means of verifying that. So people could cheat on that one. And I will tell you quite frankly, once it hits the floor, I don't know if the 5 years will stay. There may be a lot of people feel that 5 years is too long. The 5 years is there because that was what was in the bill last year.
Appreciate you touching on that, because that's the other piece of, I suppose somebody could game something somewhere, but appreciate that. Any other questions? Committee, Senator Schuler first and then Senator Cooper.
Well, I'm glad you, Mr. Chairman, thank you for bringing up the bottom of page 2, because that's a question that I have too. But I actually wondered why you didn't think about maybe going just a little bit longer, like 10 years. I started thinking about, the property sales tax, or, taxes started really going up, in the last 4 or 5 years. So I get that. But, you know, you start thinking about, I think the average home in Jackson was 3.2 million 5 or 6 years ago. Now it's 8.6 million. I'm wondering if you looked at maybe going 10 years and really capturing more of the residents that have really been here a long time instead of a lot of the move-ins that have come in. And just some thoughts on that, if you have some.
Senator, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, I've thought about more years and I've thought about less years, and I can't really, I thought, well, I'll just trust the will of the body and see what they come up with. I can see an argument for a longer time period. Some people may want to go shorter. What I did is I resolved that by just taking what passed the House, 45 to 16, and thought, you know, that it represents maybe a lot of work. And this was the one last year was a joint revenue bill. I mean, they worked this bill pretty hard. It's a shame it didn't get through. We got a second chance. We got a do-over.
Any other questions? Senator Cooper?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, this should easily be an automatic exemption. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper, thank you. I missed that in the presentation. It's required that the homeowner initially apply, and then it stays in place. They don't have to reapply every year. If they sell the home, go to a new home, they would reapply. But it's not like the current one where you got to submit your income tax applications and all that other stuff. It's a pretty simple form is what I understand.
Senator, thank you for being here this evening and hanging tough with us. I'll let you drift a little bit into the background and we'll go to some testimony on this bill. I want to hear from the department. That's always helpful, and to others in the room. So
I do want to say this,
yeah,
regards to the outcome on the bill. Thank you for doing double duty, you know, meeting twice on Tuesday and Wednesdays. It's a big deal. And thank you for your service there.
Thanks for that acknowledgement, Senator, but this is important stuff. And I think we all share the desire to get something done. And we've got a lot of things flying around and a lot of meetings going on and some abbreviated committees because of it. So, Director, welcome back. This is Senator Kinski's bill, which is Senate File 121. Can you give us
Thank
your
you,
thoughts
Mr.
on this
Chairman.
one?
Absolutely, and my comments will be brief. As stated by the good sponsor, we can administer this exemption in the computer-assisted mass appraisal system. The only comment that I would have related to this bill, we had some discussions related to primary residence and some of the other bills that we've talked about, is it just the residential structure? Is it also include the land? Does it include the other outbuildings? So I would just ask that possibly add a definition for primary residence so that there's no question related to what that up to 300,000. From the testimony, it sounds like for most properties and the lower end properties that up to 300,000, that sounds like the intent is the entire property up to that 300,000, land, structures, improvements, as long as the primary use is residential. But just to clarify that perhaps in this legislation. But other than that, because this is backfilled, I believe that we can handle it with the CAMA system, and any responsibility of the Department of Revenue noted in the bill, we can accomplish. I'd stand for any questions.
Thank you, Director. Any questions for the Director from the?
Thank
Oh,
you.
good. You bet. I think we're good to go. Is there anybody else owed? Ms. Huxtable?
Getting weak in the afternoon, I couldn't push the button hard enough, sorry about that. Mr. Chairman, Dixie Huxtable again, Converse County Assessor with the Assessors Association. We had the same concerns that the director did in regards to what is included in the property. On page 2, it talks about a portion of property used as a primary residence. And so I'm not sure what the real definition is, if it's all of that parcel or if there was an intent for it to be something less than. So I would concur that a definition of that would be helpful. I wanted to make a comment about the 5 years. We're sitting back here, we've talked about some bills that have a rollback to 2019 and 2020, which seems to be the time period where the bulk of the spikes start going up with property taxes. And by the time this bill would go into effect in 2025, those people that came in during that time frame would have hit that 5 year. I just want to make that correlation between the rollback bills where we're trying to get before it and the fact that they would fall within this 5-year limit, which is certainly doable for us to administer if that's the wish of this body. I would also comment that the way it's written, as we understand it, yes, once they file and qualify, they would remain qualified, but they would still have to contact our office once a year to verify that they're still qualified. That's similar to the veterans program that we do, so that's not a big problem for us. And then I guess it is backfilled as long as there is subject to availability of funding. On page 4, that verbiage is in there, so I guess the concern would be for us if that funding isn't there some year and I don't know that I understand that the program goes away if there's no funding, or if there's just no backfill if there's no funding in a year. I think the taxing entities that I work with would like to know that answer. And if that were to be the case, then we would definitely want to consider adjusting that application date. This one is the 4th Monday in May. And as long as it's backfilled, that works for us because our abstracts are due June 1st. So we're submitting an abstract with full amount. But if that was to change and there was not going to be a backfill, that may be something we'd want to consider, one of those date changes back to like a February 1st or something, to give us time to get it in and let the taxing entities know what they're dealing with. And other than that, I think I would stand for any questions.
So, Dixie, real quickly, paragraph A on page 2, you indicated that would be a notification every year, and I'm looking back at the department. I assume that would be part of the rules that would be developed, and each of our assessors would have exactly how that process needs to take place, that notification, or
Mr. Chairman, I
both
think
the initial and later.
I think you're referring to on page 3.
Oh, it's
where,
page
where
3.
the sworn claim comes in up in Romanet 2, and then paragraph B explains that after the filing of a sworn statement that the claimant shall remain qualified for this homeowner's exemption, provided that they notify the assessor annually by a certain time frame. So that really does fall in line with what we do with our veterans currently. So I think that would be relatively easy to manage in rules because we're used to doing that.
And so that 4th Monday in May, what date would you prefer?
Mr. Chairman, we were looking at moving these application dates up to like February 1st to give us enough time to process them and get them in the system. And again, sometimes it depends on whether there's going to be any backfill, so that we're certifying a value that we know we're going to get backfilled for our taxing entities. But if we could move them all maybe to February 1st, it might be helpful.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Mhm.
Any, go ahead, Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question I have is, particularly, I guess I'm kind of gearing it towards those folks up in Teton County, but I don't know how many of those are their primary residences. I have a feeling that not a lot of them are, but how do you determine that? How does one determine whether or not they're the primary residence or not?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, we don't know who occupies a house. We have no way of knowing that under our current processes. It could be the owner occupied, it could be rental, it could be family, it could be vacant. So we don't have a way of knowing who's occupying that house. And that's why we would be relying on that form and that statement that the department's going to promulgate under rules. And it's going to be, they sign an affidavit that this is their primary home. And that's why I feel it's important that you have them check in annually, because people do move. They might change their their domicile. And so it's important that they check in with us and at least confirm verbally, if nothing else, that they're still there.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Huxtable. Appreciate it. Further testimony on Senate File 121. Come on forward, Mr. Winnie.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. Just some quick thoughts for you. The 5-year rule runs the risk of perhaps pricing out some military members that may return to the state after active duty. If you look at our current veterans exemption, I bought land that I later built on in the 90s and built on it 2005, 2006, and I wasn't eligible for the veterans exemption till I'd lived in it for 3 years. And so that 5-year rule would, if you had a military family moving back into the state after active duty, buy a house, they wouldn't be eligible for this until they had lived there for the appropriate amount of time. And this is kind of related. You also talk about tradesmen. Teton County, Jackson has had a real problem with tradesmen having to live other places like Lincoln County or across the hill in Idaho. Senator Dockstader has referred to the morning and evening rush hour there as the Snake River 500, as they have to commute. So the 5-year rule, I understand why it's there, but it runs a risk of pricing some people out of a market that you might be interested in. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Mr. Winnie, thank you. Appreciate you being here, and it's always good to see you. Yeah, anyone else? How about the Farm Bureau?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau. This bill follows a principle that I really like. It's called the KISS. Keep it simple, silly. This bill is simple, direct, easier to administrate. So sitting in support of this bill, having one of the parts that I appreciate greatly is that you have to live in the house for 9 months. I really appreciate that, to keep out the people that just come in for the ski season or just for a few months in the summer. I appreciate that you have to truly live in the house for at least 9 months every year. I think this works. It'll help my members. And I really appreciate that, the lower priced houses, the houses younger people tend to start out in, it's going to give them the bigger bang for the buck. And with that, Mr. Chairman, committee, I would sit for any questions.
Thank you, Brent. Appreciate that. Anything for Mr. Moline?
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Further testimony. Good evening. Thank you for hanging in there with us.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Melissa Schinkel, Teton County Assessor. I do have one question regarding who's eligible for the exemption. It does mention specifically that a business entity you primarily form for the purpose of farming or ranching would qualify, but I do wonder if any other LLCs would qualify.
So, Melissa, can you help us locate where that language is?
Yes, sir. On page 5, the last paragraph.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the rest of the paragraphs generally just discuss persons, but that last paragraph does reference the farming and ranching businesses.
So, Ms. Shingle, and sorry to be less than formal there, one moment. So, any thoughts about what would make you more comfortable there? Say that again for me.
Mr. Chairman, the third paragraph there specifically discusses farming and ranching businesses. So my question is just, is the intent to leave out other types of businesses, LLCs particularly?
So I'm looking back at the sponsor of the bill, and it looks like he's taking good notes there. And again, that's something we'll look into.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Teton County tonight? Very much appreciated. Thank you, Lisa. Further testimony on Senate File 121. Anything, anybody want to come forward on 121? Anybody online? Okay, Pierre, thank you. We're going to close testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure on Senate File 121?
This bill.
Okay, moved by Senator Cooper. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator Cooper.
the only thing I can see that would, I really like this bill a lot, better than any of all of them I've seen, and I've been co-sponsor on a couple of them. The only thing I can see that would really add to this bill is a good definition of a single-family residential property. And in the previous bill we looked at, it has a really good definition of a single-family residential property and what that includes. So I'd like to see that included if possible.
Senator Cooper, it's funny you bring that up. I put off to the side of that paragraph A on page 2, Dockstader language. So, brilliant minds think alike, I think. Yeah.
Section E.
So paragraph A, page 2 is where I wrote it down, but we would track that in
It's a definition.
probably on page 1, Senator Kinsky. We'd have to figure that out as the bill moves along, if it does. I don't sense that the bill is in jeopardy, but we got to make sure it moves. And when it does, we'll work on that. But anyway, I agree with Senator Cooper. I think just a better understanding, and I liked that Senator Dockstader didn't just pull in the primary resident piece. It was a homeowner's property, I think, if that makes sense. Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I actually just wonder maybe on page 2, also line 4, maybe cleaning up that definition where it says a portion of property, maybe just clarifying that. I'm not sure it needs a definition, but maybe just a clarifying statement, I don't know. Or even just taking out portion and just put a property, used as a primary residence. But again, that would be something for the bringer of the bill. But I would add that I'd be happy to make an amendment on page 3 to add February 1st in there on line 14.
Taking out 4th Monday in May. Okay, any discussion on that amendment? All in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No, that amendment has passed. So February 1st on line 14, page 3, Pierre?
Would you also change the language on line 3, page 3?
Thank you. I believe that's conforming. And so that's good catch, Pierre, up there on line 3, same thing. And I think that's friendly. So please incorporate that into the amendment. Anything further on this bill?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Senator Cooper.
I'd like to suggest an amendment, and we can talk about it for just a second, forget the right language. On page 2, line 4, where it says a portion of property, can that say a single-family residential property used as a primary residence instead of a portion? So basically, you would strike portion of and insert single-family.
I think that's
Single-family residential.
I think that's a very fair amendment. The only qualification I would give is that we may want to continue to work that so that we encompass, I like that one of the bills encompassed the residential property, which would include, the garage or whatever. And
Right. If we have the, and probably the thing to do here is go back to the bringer of the bill, if he's going to put that language in there, just to have this line 4 confirm with our definition of single family.
I'm getting a thumbs up back there. Thank you, Senator, for, I think tonight then maybe we'll not track in anything, Senator Cooper, if
I
that's
agree.
all right.
Yeah.
And we'll work that one as we go along. Everybody good with 121? Okay. Chair, please take roll on Senate File 121.
Senator Case,
Excused?
Senator Cooper,
Aye.
Senator Furphy,
Aye.
Senator Schuler,
Aye.
Chairman Linden.
Aye. Okay. Senate File 121, we'll move upstairs and continue the journey. And thank you, Senator Kinski, for taking good notes. There's some good things came up tonight, I think, that might make this even better. Good bill, though. Thanks for your time. And appreciate you hanging in there with us, Senator Dockstader. Thank you. Senator, please come forward. Senator McKeown. Next bill for our consideration is Senate File 119, Property Tax Exemption Specified Real Property 2. Walk us through Senate File 119. Senator McKeown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All these bills are kind of very similar. So I'm going to focus on a little bit about what's different about this one. In 19, it's been a long 2 days. In 2020, we had the COVID event, which led to a bunch of people moving to the state of Wyoming because of the freedoms, and we were a lot less restrictive. And part of that caused housing values to go way up. And that's going to bring me to the first point. This bill is actually truly some tax relief. The first thing that's notable is we're going to take the value of the home back to 2019. What that does is there's already been a valuation for everything for that year, so you don't have to start over or do anything, I believe. So now we're back there, and then we're going to adjust it with the wage growth index. So let's say between 2019, and I'm just picking numbers to make an example, you have a $100,000 house is what it was worth in 2019. And now in 2023, we've had a 5% increase in the wage growth index. So that house would be valued at $105,000, and that's where it would start. Then there's going to be a 3% cap. So you can't raise the property taxes more than 3% in the following years, or the wage growth index. So if the wage growth index is 2%, the cap becomes 2%. If the wage growth index is 6% or 7%, the cap becomes 3%. Am I pretty clear on that?
I think we're good, Senator.
And it's
We're following.
important to note that we're using the median household income or a wage growth index based on each county. So we're going to compare apples and apples. And that's kind of really the differences of the bill from everything else you've heard. So I'll stand by for questions.
Any questions of the sponsor tonight? Any
Chairman.
questions, Senator McKeown? Go ahead, Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator McKeown, I don't see any language in here that addresses the new construction between 2019, whether it be outbuildings or new homes or anything of that nature that we've been discussing on these other bills. Do you have any thoughts on that?
There is language. Let me find it. Basically, if the house was built in 2023, it starts out as its own value. Or 2020. If it wasn't around in 2019, there's no basis to start with, and then it becomes, that's your fair market value.
So Senator, that's a good distinction. I think Senator Cooper might have been heading in the direction of what happens if in 2019, say 2020, I decide to build that shop I've been talking about and change the property. Would this not require a little bit of consideration for changes in property?
I think I can revisit that.
Yeah. Something to think about.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Senator Cooper, follow up.
Follow up, yes, and in addition to that would be, if I had a 2,000 square foot house and I put a 2,000 square foot addition on it at some point in there, those kind of improvements we need to be able to capture somehow in that time period, would be my question, sir.
Does that make sense, Senator?
Yes, and I think during the execution of the bill, the value of the house would have gone up substantially. So when we went back to the 2019 value, you would include the additions.
Yeah, we probably, Senator, if and when this bill moves forward, that's a consideration for this bill. Each of these bills has their own singular characteristic. Quite frankly, all of them good, have some good to them. So I like a couple features in here, but one thing this bill does lack is that ability for 2019 to 25. What about changes in property, additions, outbuildings, improvements, et cetera? We may have to capture that somehow.
If
Further
you decide to
questions?
let the bill go forward,
Yeah.
I will take a good look at that
Yeah.
and see what we can do to
Okay.
shore it up one way or the other.
Senators, any further questions of the sponsor? Senator Furphy, then we'll come back to Senator Cooper.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, if I'm reading it right, there's no requirement that this has to be your primary residence. So it could be owned by out-of-state business, for example? Am I understanding that right? Thank you.
Senator McEwen.
No, it doesn't just exclude it to primary residence. It's fair across the board on all structures you own.
Okay, Senator Cooper, anything? So Senator McCune, if you could hang with us back there, perhaps with Senator Dockstader, we'll get testimony on this bill. How about that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senate File 119, Department, we would love to hear from you. Again, thanks for all the yeoman's work, helping us to understand each one of these. Welcome back, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue. As stated previously, each of these bills have a little different turn here and there. And so if I may, I'll just kind of walk through the bill, starting with page 2. So on page 2, line 5, you'll see it states it's an exemption for a portion of the value of real property in the all other property category as provided by Wyoming statute, except agricultural land and personal property. So it's important to note this includes commercial property as well. This includes multifamily. This includes everything that would be in that all other category currently in statute. Going down to line 16, this bill speaks to the assessor being required to utilize the rate of change in median household income for the county where the property is located as determined by the Department of Workforce Services. So when we worked on the fiscal note for this bill, it should be noted Workforce Services gets their information from economic analysis. So that's where we went to get this median household income. It's also where on the property tax refund program, when we are required to use the median household income per county, that's where we go to. So just a suggestion that perhaps that should be economic analysis. Then after that, then we have to make this comparison per county related to median household income, and then compare that to the 3%. So as you can see, we've got to start with the 2019 value, make some determinations, and not statewide now. Previous bills were statewide. It was, either a consumer price index or the 3%. This one says it's per county. So that's a little different math within the computer assisted mass appraisal system. As stated previously, the concern that we have related to going back to 2019 values, and Mr. Chairman, you've identified those, but I know the good sponsor was not available. So since 2019, we've had 10,593 new residential structures added to the assessment roll, 18,058 residential outbuildings, 2,586 commercial structures for a total of 31,000 plus structures. And we also know that there are new subdivisions, new where people split off 10 acres, and that's a new parcel. So in 2019, statewide, we had 308,279 parcels in the CAMA system. In 2023, we had 314,318. Now that's a net difference of 39. Now why I say net difference is, so when I take a section of land and plot that into a new subdivision, and I take one parcel and I now have 36 parcels. So I've got 36 new parcels, but I've got one less parcel, because that parcel that existed in 2019 doesn't exist anymore. Now I've got 36 new parcels that maybe were platted in 2022. So we would ask that there be very detailed guidance related to how we're going to deal with these new parcels, new structures, changes to those existing structures, so that there's a uniform approach statewide for all of the county assessors to follow. This particular exemption does not require an application. So we believe that the CAMA system could handle applying the exemption as stated, except for just determining, once we calculate what the exemption would be, we're good to go. It's the calculations to get to what should that exemption be. And this is not backfilled. So this bill requires that the county assessor put on the assessment schedule, which has to be to the property owners no later than the fourth Monday in April. And there's no backfill. So their abstract, when they submit that abstract to the State Board of Equalization, has to be accurate as of June 1st. So there's not a lot of turnaround time for them to process this calculation. I will tell you that we did not complete a fiscal note related to the programming that will need to be done in the system to get from 2019 to a 2024 value. You may want to notice that this bill says that this is effective for the 2024 tax year. I like to be able to say that we can accomplish miracles, but that would be a miracle for assessors across the state to figure out how to implement this bill and have the amount of the exemption noted on the assessment schedules the fourth Monday in April of this year. But with that, Mr. Chairman, with additional guidance, I think we could figure out a way.
You know, Director, this is my fault for not asking the question, but on that previous bill, I think you felt like you could stand that one up fairly quickly, just as the one at noon today that we went through. Is that a correct remembrance of mine?
Yes, Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
as long as we're not going back to prior years, we can administer those exemptions quickly. It's that way you're not changing the appraisal process. You're not looking back to past years. What were the characteristics of the property at that time compared to what the characteristics are of the property currently? As long as we don't have that look back, we can really rapidly push those exemptions out.
So I think at least 2 out of these 4 today could be implemented fairly quickly in the year 24. Little bit of a challenge on this one.
But
on
Mr.
that
Chairman,
front.
the significant difference is this includes commercial property and multifamily,
True.
and the other ones were single-family
Senator
residential.
Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, do you have any thoughts on what, without the backfill, what the cost would be to the counties, just in general?
Mr. Chairman, the fiscal note is included in the bill. As stated, what happens for these fiscal notes is we provide historical data to the Legislative Service Office, and they do the projections. And so I don't have anything to add to the fiscal note that the LSO provided. And I believe the majority of the content, if you look on the back page where it talks about the bill would decrease residential and commercial property taxes by an estimated $259.6 million in tax year 2024, which is, those taxes are collected in fiscal year 25. And then an estimated $263.9 million in tax year 2025, estimated $268 million in tax year 26. Again, those are LSO numbers.
Anything, go ahead, Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, so that would be relatively close to what would be not going to the counties, is that correct?
So, Mr. Chairman, and like I said, we gave them historical information, and they actually went through these calculations in the aggregate. However, it really doesn't guide us on how to handle those calculations on the individual structure, individual piece of land, individual property, because every assessment schedule that goes to the taxpayer, they have the ability to question. They want to know exactly how that value was calculated, and they have the ability to appeal that value to the County Board of Equalization. So it's important that we be able to provide that homeowner or commercial business owner with a report that says, this is how we got to your value. Because they can appeal it if they wish. Thank you, Senator Cooper.
Very good. Director, thank you,
Thank you.
as always. Further testimony on Senate File 119.
Mr. Chairman, Bob McLaren with WHAM. Our members are opposed to this bill. We feel like because it includes commercial as well as the residential, we appreciate the need for tax reform for residential. But we believe this would place a pretty severe burden on our smaller communities. So our members are not very excited about this one. But I would also say as a personal note, as a resident of Teton County, as it was mentioned previously, it's all residential properties, even those at Shooting Star and John Dodge, some of those really high-end properties. And I will tell you from firsthand experience, those people are buying in Wyoming because of our state tax structure as it currently exists. I had the opportunity to work in Vail, Colorado for a number of years, and a number of our residents relocated from Vail to Jackson simply because of our state tax structure. So, but for the Wyoming state tax structure, those people would be buying homes in Aspen, and Vail, Telluride, in some of those Colorado communities. So, but our membership is opposed to this one. And if it's going to go forward, we would ask for some backfill for our members. Thank you, sir.
Mr. McLaurin. Really appreciate it. Any questions for Wham tonight? Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Further testimony on Senate File 119. Let's be ready. Keep coming. Come on up. Let's get lined up. It's getting late in the night. We want to
Mr. Chairman.
finish this one up. Go ahead,
Seems like a
Brett.
long time since I've been here. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. Appreciate what this bill does. I do have some concerns that it does put agriculture kind of out on an island where it includes the other two. I appreciate what it would do for my members at their home level. I do have concerns that it puts agriculture kind of out on an island. And I wish, in my opinion, it would be much simpler if you just went with a 3% maximum increase, rather than trying to incorporate in what the wage rate is. Maybe things have changed, but so many times when you're figuring the wage rate, there's delays on that. It's not as timely as other sources of information. A lot of times there's a year or 2 years delay to get that information. At least that was the situation when I worked for the University of Wyoming up on campus. A lot of times they would have to come out and correct those numbers because, the most recent previous year was always more of a swag, if you will. But they would have to come back as they gathered more information. So I think I really appreciate the maxing it out at a 3% increase. And my suggestion would be to you can only increase up to 3%. I understand why there's a reason that you would want to have the wage rate in there. If your wage rate dipped down, that would bring it below the 3%, which would be advantageous to the commercial and the residential property. But at least the way it used to be, that wage data was delayed. And so having to go back and correct the corrections might be more burdensome. But I do appreciate what this bill does, putting the limit on the increases. Not a bad idea at all. Appreciate that. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for any questions the committee may have for me.
Okay, thanks, Brett. Any questions for Farm Bureau? Thank you very much. Mr. Riemann.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. The previous two speakers about took my talking points. The two causes for concern for us in this bill are the commercial property element. Commercial property rates in the state of Wyoming are the lowest in the country. They're dead last in terms of that level. So that is one cause for concern for us. The tie to wages is also a bit of a concern. And I just note that two counties in the data for this last year actually went below zero, so they're in negative. And I appreciate that some home values, fair market values do go negative, and that certainly should apply to them. But should we be applying negatives across the county if a property's fair market value actually has increased? And that's where a cap above zero makes sense, because it captures all of those particular circumstances. So I just urge some caution around the wage component of this. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions.
Any questions for the county commissioners tonight? Mr. Riemann? Thank you, Jeremiah, for being here. Appreciate that. Any further testimony from anyone who wants to come forward on Senate File 119? Is there anyone online tonight? Okay. I'm going to close testimony on Senate File 119. Committee, what's your pleasure? Please come forward. Senator McEwen. We were going to see if we got a motion on the bill and move it, and you're welcome to discuss. So take it away. Thoughts, Mr. McEwen?
I can wait if you want me to, Mr. Chairman.
That's okay. Let's get your thoughts. I'm sure you were taking some notes. I was going to share a couple of mine with you, but take it away.
I think it's important to realize of all the property tax bills, this is the one that actually is giving some substantial relief to people who are losing their homes. And there's only one way you can ever cut taxes or give relief. It's got to come from somewhere. And if we just move it from one pile of money to another pile of money, or change the tax structure and collect it another way instead of through property taxes, we don't actually do the cut, we're not really giving anybody relief. We're just changing what their tax structure looks like. So I would just ask you to give it a chance and let's see what we can do with it. But it truly does bring relief, and it truly could help people keep their houses. And the reason it's tied to each county is substantially different. If some of the smaller counties are in trouble or don't have growth, their home value is not going to go up. So it's going to have a net zero effect on them. If my house is worth, I go back to the $105,000, the same amount of property taxes are going to be brought in. So I just wanted to make that point. If we're actually going to give some property tax relief, this may not be a bad vessel. And the black helicopters flying around, if the valuation of the county doesn't grow, basically this bill doesn't even exist. In reality, if the values of houses go down, the property taxes are going to stay the same. There's going to be no cap because there's no increase. And that really is tied to the wage index. If the wage index goes up, economically, the house prices are going to go up because that's what's going on in the economy. If the wage index goes down, house prices are not going to increase. And we have some different communities around the state that's simply not the case. Their values are going to keep going up and up and up. And that's some of the people who are really going to get help out of this. People who live in Teton County that bought a $250,000 house or $100,000 house that now has the fear of being valued at $5 million. And then you throw in the increase on top of that, and now they're faced with losing a house.
Yeah, I think, Senator, I think we certainly follow what this bill would do, and I appreciate you kind of expounding on that. I think, I think the points that were made throughout the evening, just so that you can scratch your head and think about this as the bill moves forward, the ag land piece was brought up. So I think the language exception on agricultural land, I would encourage you to think about that one a little bit. The wage rate, it was brought up simply because it really complicates the ability to implement this bill quickly, because that's a calculation that's got to be made county by county by county. The third thing is the commercial property piece, which the county commissioners just pointed to. So, those three things, as the bill moves forward, those I would encourage you to think about that, Senator. And other than that, I think we totally get what this would do. So, appreciate you bringing the bill.
Well, thank you for letting me speak again, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. So, committee, what's your pleasure on this bill? Moved by Cooper. Any further discussion on this bill?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Cooper.
just briefly, there's some things in this bill I like a lot. But my biggest problem with it is the lack of backfill and what it does to our smaller poor counties. It devastates those counties. So that's my issue.
Anything else? Let's go to a roll call vote on Senate File 119. Pierre,
Senator Case,
excused?
Senator Cooper,
No.
Senator Furphy, Senator Schuler,
Senator Schuler left an aye vote.
Chairman Linden.
I'll give it an aye.
Senator, Mr. Ray. I'll change my no to aye if that's acceptable. I've said all the way through this, we need to bring every bill possible forward. This one has some issues that I don't care for, but I'd like to change my no to aye.
Okay, so Senate File 119 will go to the Senate. This is a work in progress. I'm looking at two of the fine sponsors of good property tax legislation, and I would encourage a lot of coordination and cooperation and interaction with the other two folks who have brought bills, and I know that the senators will be helping on that front. I would pledge, this committee, having sat through and kind of taken some notes with you. But anyway, I want to thank the senators who brought legislation. This is an important issue, and I think a lot of us in the Senate want to go home with something that's substantial and good. So, anything else, committee? We've got people to see and things to do and places to go, and so we're gonna adjourn for tonight. And thank you to the department, everyone who has sat through. Appreciate the county commissioners. Appreciate our assessor from Converse County. Dixie, thank you very much for, okay. We're out of here, and we have a meeting in the morning, so we'll be right back here before you know it.